A school in St Albans has scrapped the madness of discriminatory and archaic hair policies to encourage its students to express themselves and, indeed, their culture. So the all-boys Verulam school, apparently, used to send pupils home for hair that was extreme in style, colour or length. But now, long hair, cornrows and man buns are all acceptable. But can I just say a man bun is never acceptable?
Never, never. Well, the school has also scrapped ties and blazers in their uniforms, as well as the policy for business attire in sixth form. Head teacher Julie Richardson said this will allow students to be themselves and choose to wear cultural and religious dress, such as the Middle Eastern ankle-length robe.
I don't know what you're trying to say.
I don't know. She said if businessmen in the city are no longer wearing suits and ties, why then should teenagers? While GBNews' culture and social affairs
just quickly on that. Well, then loads of people aren't going into work, so why should children turn up for school? If that's your logic.
Yeah, most people, I feel, yeah.
Anyway, carry on.
Tangential. Our GBNews' culture and social affairs editor, Inaya Folarin, joins us to discuss this. When I first heard this story, I didn't realise, actually, it was a boys' school. So I thought, oh, well, yeah, sure, long hair for girls and all, you know, different coloured hair, perhaps. But now I'm thinking, man buns? Actually, I'm quite against having man buns in school suddenly.
I think this is counter to what is equality. I mean, that the head teacher has justified this on the ground that this could be potentially harmful to students of colour and that it's allowing them to express themselves. But actually, you know, schools, kids come from all different economic and social backgrounds, and actually oftentimes uniform is the way in which there is a level playing field, that you're not having competition over your hairstyles, you're not having competition over your clothes and your shoes, that all kids are essentially the same. And I actually think it fosters a sense of shared community and shared cultural identity within the school. And actually, I think things like this actually erode that.
I agree completely. We used to have our own clothes day at my school.
That was a special day.
Mufti day. There you go. And I'll never forget this. There was a lad at school who, until Own Clothes Day, was deemed, you know, completely normal, relatively popular, turned up on Own Clothes Day wearing a bit of a ridiculous outfit and got mercilessly bullied for the next 4 years of his life, right, as a result of it. Whereas if you just stick to uniform and you have some kind of uniform structure, it's a leveller, isn't it?
Yeah, but even this idea that kids expressing themselves, to me, that's not the purpose of school. And I think that we're seeing the decentering of actually the transmission of knowledge from one generation to another. You know, history, science, maths as the pinnacle of what education is actually meant to be about in order to prepare young people for life in the outside world with the knowledge and skills. And things like, expressing oneself and finding oneself, that's not necessarily the purpose of school. I think outside of school you do that. You go to parties, you meet your friends. School is not necessarily the place where you experiment with fashion and styles. It's for education.
Do you think there is a line to be drawn, however, between styles and ways of looking, ways of expression that might be out of choice, and ways of expressing yourself that might be to do with your culture or religion at school?
I don't necessarily think that is the appropriate place to do that. I don't see why that is necessary. I think we are in the UK, and again, there's this shared kind of British identity and British norms and heritage. And I think actually it is good for kids to necessarily leave the specificities of their family life behind. And when they go into school, they enter into a common community where there's discipline, structure and order within the school setting. So I think that I don't necessarily support this idea. And I do worry that actually many of the trends in education is going towards a child-centred approach. Rather than actually a discipline centre.
Yeah, and then I'm not being funny, but, I'm generalising a bit here, but I think that then breeds the kind of person that is very self-entitled. The kind of person who expects, life isn't always like this. Not everyone in the professional world, people don't just bow down in front of you. There are rules, and that's the way it should be. Whereas I think we're creating a generation of people, we may have already created a generation of people who expect everything to be their way,
Well, I think that's a really good point, because when we see these, students in university campuses protesting, and people say, why are these students hypersensitive? Why are they thinking all of these things? They didn't get those ideas from themselves. Oftentimes, it started much earlier in education, where they're being normalised into this idea that they can get everything they want. Everything's kind of hyper-regulated, hyper-managed. They're sensitive and vulnerable, and all of these kinds of ideas. And by the time they get into adulthood, those are the expectations and norms that they take with them. And oftentimes kids that go to then university then go into the media, cultural and technological establishment, then shape the norms of wider society. And I think that we are cultivating a generation that doesn't really have much respect for authority.
And later on, I do want to get your views on this because it's something we'll be touching on later on. We'll be speaking about how some universities are mollycoddling students in terms of what they can access literature-wise. What do you make? Is this all part of the same phenomenon, basically? This is in relation to Northampton University basically censoring or putting a trigger warning on the book 1984. Is this just all part of that same phenomenon where we're treating students like they're babies, like we don't want to expose them to the real world, when actually, down the line, that's just going to make them, well, I don't know what word I can use that I can say at 9, 10, whatever the time is, 11:30, but yeah, weak.
Well, it is interesting. Sociologists have identified a phenomenon called the therapeutic turn. And this was over the last 30 years, where it increasingly became normalised, this idea that human beings are fundamentally vulnerable. We're fundamentally weak. And if you have those kinds of assumptions about human beings, what is the natural response? To cuddle them, to protect them, to censor life, to sanitise life away from risk-taking, and everything is safety first. And actually, that's really what we are seeing in all aspects of public life, from education to even, some people argue, the COVID-19 mitigation. It's always this idea of safetyism. And actually, we must be protected from all risk, when in reality, that can't be the case.
I do worry what would happen if we were ever, God forbid, to have to go to war again. You're looking at me like, what's she going to say?
I am, yeah.
If we ever had to go to war again, because sometimes I just think, you know, there were generations before us where you pretty much didn't have a choice. You go out and you fight for your country, and, you know, if you're a young, fit man, you know, there were kids, basically, going out and being put in these awful, horrible situations where completely out of their comfort zone in every way, shape or form. Sometimes I worry that if something like that was to happen, we'd be saying, oh, well, we don't want to hurt their feelings. You know, there'd be all these rules and things that would stop us from, you know, people going and fighting for their country.
Well, I think one of the big things that would stop people fighting for this country is the fact that I think there's a lot of young people in this country who just wouldn't.
Yeah, just on ideological. And that's the other thing. We might have an exception. Oh, I disapprove of Britain as a whole, so therefore I don't have to fight for Britain.
I mean,
would you fight for this country?
Well, I once heard a phrase.
I was joking.
I'll fight philosophically. I once heard a phrase that maybe we're suffering from peace, that because we've benefited from so much economic and social prosperity over the last few decades, that, you know, we've kind of had to find new grievances, and we're not used to the actual real struggle and all of the things that come along with that. So maybe that's the case.
Whole first world problems.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Well, Inaya, really insightful. Always great to have you, Inaya Folarin Iman there.